I can't die here. I can't. I gotta do it for them. I, I gotta do it for them. How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is part 1 of What If Deku Was a Saiyan. And now, let's begin. You gotta get out of here now, Inko! Inko's parents would yell at her as she rushes out to try and find Izuku. She finds him sitting on the floor, just looking around at the complete chaos going on around him. As Izuku was just staring on as Inko and her parents were rushing around looking for things. As Inko and her parents would rush them both to the space pods, where they would then shove Izuku and Inko into one, as it would then blast off, as Frieza, now looming over the Saiyan planet, would release down his massive ki ball as we make contact with the planet, making it explode. As Inko would watch on as her planet would just explode into thousands of pieces. She just couldn't help but try to hold back her tears, not wanting to cry in front of her baby. As everything just seemed to be going downhill for her. First, she got pregnant with Izuku, and then Izuku's father just strangely disappeared. Izuku, hopefully, she would try to make him have a happy life wherever they would end up landing. However, when Inko was sleeping along with Izuku, all of a sudden a mysterious galactic portal would just form out of nowhere in the exact direction the space pod was going, as the space pod would go right through it, and it would then appear inches away from Earth's atmosphere in a completely different universe. As the space pod would then smash down onto Earth's planet, as Inko, the scouter, would end up looking out after waking up and scouting around, as she could see that the power level on this planet wasn't very strong. It was nothing compared to the Saiyan planet, so she would sigh a gasp of relief before sitting back down. She would try to sense any type of ki around her, however, there was none. No ki was anywhere, as all she could sense was her ki and Zuku's. So, as all of this would be happening, all of a sudden, many heroes would surround Inko, as she would get up in a guarding position, as if about to fight all of them, as she would start pleading with all of the heroes, yelling that she doesn't want to fight them, as many of the heroes would start questioning her and yelling at her, just yelling, "What are you doing here, villain? What did you do?" As fire would end up spreading throughout the forest that Inko's pod had landed in, as Izuku would now start to cry as the heroes would look on towards the baby, who had a mysterious tail swirling around. "What? Whose baby is that? Did you steal someone's baby?" As Inko would start pleading with the heroes, however they weren't making any sense to her, as finally a sensible hero would end up appearing out of nowhere. "Calm down," All Might would say in a striking voice, as the golden figure would walk towards Inko and ask her if she could calm down for them. She would relax before telling her just the people about all of the stories. They would label her as crazy. However, All Might could sense that she was speaking in such truth that she wasn't lying. She had no reason to lie, as All Might would and ask for a scientist to come out after calling someone on the phone, as Nezu would end up running out being good friends with All Might, as he would end up looking at the technology around the space pod. "Well, I guess her story does match up. This looks like nothing compared to what we do have on this planet, huh?" Inko would nod her head, saying that on her planet it was much more just advanced than what this was, as Nezu would just sort of laugh. "Well, I guess you may be right about that. It says if we never got into certain topics, we probably would be more highly advanced. But who really cares right now?" As Inko would be let to go and leave, as All Might would ask her if she wanted to stay at his place, as All Might during that night would end up teaching Inko just the rules of the society and what to do and what not to. As Inko would end up moving in with All Might, since she pretty much had no place to stay. As over the next couple of years, Inko and All Might would grow closer and closer together, as since Inko really hadn't done anything since Izuku was born, since Izuku's father was out of the picture, so Inko decided just to stay there and along with All Might pretty much, as she would end up growing even more attached to All Might, growing a love for him over the next couple of months, as All Might would actually have that love grow in him as well, before he would end up asking her out, as she would end up accepting this, and they would end up getting along quite well. And after just 2 years, when Izuku would end up turning 3 years old, they would end up getting married, as Inko, who knew it was All Might all along, would grow to love Yagi as well. Pretty much they're basically the same person after all. One is just a hero, while the other is a family man. So with that, Izuku would end up growing up with All Might, the number one hero, as his father. However, Izuku was kept to think that his father wasn't the number one hero, but rather a doctor, as they didn't want Izuku going around with a loud mouth telling everyone at his preschool, "My dad's All Might and all of this and that." They just didn't want that to happen. So, keeping it a secret, Izuku would grow up not knowing that his favorite hero was his stepfather. However, Izuku didn't know it was actually a stepfather either. So when Izuku turned the age of 4, Izuku would be brought in to the quirk doctor's office. However, Inko knew that there was absolutely zero chance Izuku had a quirk. However, the happy, bubbly Izuku had no clue that there was even a chance he would get a cool power. Izuku knew he had some sort of quirk. He had a tail, after all. However, Inko, in the hopes to keep Izuku just in, had actually cut the tail off. So all there was pictures of Izuku as a baby with this mysterious tail. As Izuku his mother had just gotten it cut off when Izuku was 2 years old, after a strange incident in the forest after a midnight walk. So that we're just not going to talk about. So with the tail cut off, Izuku actually wouldn't have any idea that he had a strange, mysterious power. And so Izuku would go into the quirk doctor's office all happy, jumping around, holding his might figure, swooshing it around as if it was flying. He was ecstatic. He couldn't wait to get his quirk. As Izuku would be bouncing around in his chair, his mother would place a hand on his shoulder. "Izuku, honey, can you please settle down? Everyone's staring at us." As Izuku would look on towards his mother with a happy, bright smile, as he would just turn his head, shifting it slightly. "Oh, I'm just pretty excited, Mom. I can't wait to get my quirk. It's gonna be something awesome, just like All Might," Izuku would say, pumping his fist in the air in pure excitement, as Inko would just sort of awkwardly laugh. "Yeah, let's hope you get an awesome quirk too." As Izuku just laughed, saying, "Yeah, I can't wait to see what my quirk is." The doctor would come out 2 doors before looking down at a clipboard. "The Midoriya family," he would say, as they would then get up, walking down the halls, as they would then go into a certain room. "Alright, Izuku, I'm just going to need to take a quick blood sample so that we can find out if you have a quirk or not." The doctor would get some blood from Izuku before going back, disappearing around in some sort of lab, as Izuku would end up still hopping around, this time even more, since no one was staring at him, causing him to hop around less and less. So with Izuku just jumping all around the room, bouncing around, as the doctor would end up coming in with a frown on his face, as Izuku would end up seeing it, as he would end up sitting down, as his mother had told him to calm down. How do I say this? Man, this is never easy. I'm sorry, Izuku, but it appears you don't have a quirk." What? What do you mean? What do you mean I don't have a quirk? You're just joking, right? This is just a joke, right? Right? Izuku would say, as tears would start flowing out of his eyes, as the doctor would look on down towards him before looking back at his mother. I'm sorry, Mrs. Midoriya. Hopefully this setback doesn't ruin your life or Izuku's. Good luck, the doctor would say, nodding his head, as Inko would thank the doctor before grabbing Izuku's hand and walking out, shielding his face from all the others on looking at him, as some of the kids seeing Izuku, hearing his sniffling, would start to laugh at him, saying, "Oh, that boy must not have gotten a cork. What a loser!" They would all say, as the loser would echo throughout Izuku's head. He couldn't believe it. As Izuku would get home, he would end up walking up to his room, completely a shell of what he was in the doctor's lobby. As Izuku would then sit on his neat bed, just staring off into the corner of his room, as his face was devoid of all emotion. He couldn't think of anything besides the doctor's words. Corkless. Loser. All of those words jumbled up inside of Izuku's brain as his head was starting to get dizzier and heavier, as Izuku would end up falling back, now staring at his ceiling, as his eyes would slowly start to fall, as Izuku would end up falling asleep. He couldn't believe it. His entire world had shattered like a pane of glass, and there he was in the middle of this disaster. How couldn't he have a cork? It just didn't make sense. Why was he the unlucky one? Why wasn't it someone else that didn't get a cork? However, Izuku had no clue that he wasn't human. He was a Saiyan, after all. So with that, a year would end up passing, as Izuku would end up getting bullied even more and more after word got out that he was corkless, as his emotions would end up just disappearing flat out, as the pain and suffering that Izuku had went through had caused him to hide away all of his emotions, leading to be a shell of that happy self that his mother had once seen. As Inko would end up seeing the deterioration of her son, she would try to cheer him up, buying him different types of gifts, as All Might would try to do the same. However, nothing would end up working. Nothing could give him this sheer enjoyment that a power could. So when Izuku was finally 5, he would be taken off to meet one of All Might's friends, a David Shield, who actually happened to have a daughter named Melissa Shield that was just around Izuku's age, who was also corkless. With that, they would travel down to where they lived, as Izuku would end up meeting them, as they would end up running off just exploring the different island, as All Might would end up getting some small glimpses of Izuku. It finally looked like he was having fun for the first time in over a year, and All Might couldn't believe it, as All Might would actually end up sighing before looking on towards one of his best friends. "Look, I know this might be hard to ask of you, and it might be quite sudden, but do you think you can move down to where me and Inko live?" "What? Where's this coming from, All Might?" "Well, my stepson, Izuku, he's just never been the same after he was told he was corkless. And this is the first time I've seen him smile in over a year. And I think the only way I can hopefully try to get him normal again and be happy and play with other kids his age would be if someone he actually enjoyed, someone just like him, were to move down and to be right by us." David Shield would put his hand to his chin, stroking it just as if he was thinking. "That's a tough thing to ask me, All Might. I mean, if you do pay for the house we'd end up buying, then sure." As All Might would just sort of awkwardly laugh. "I guess that makes it a deal, huh?" All Might would say, rising up his hand as if going for a handshake, as David would take it, as the kids would end up being around by All Might, as he would bring them back to where they were, as David would then tell Melissa that they were going to be moving down right next to where All Might's house was. As Izuku would hear this, he would end up looking on, smiling on, as he would end up turning his head towards All Might as if asking if this were true, as All Might would just sort of laugh, shaking his head in agreement, as Izuku would say, "Oh, that's awesome!" His now best friend, Melissa, would also say that was awesome, as a month would end up passing, as finally they would end up moving down to where Izuku and All Might and his mother had lived, as Izuku now had something to continue on going for, something to be happy about. As Izuku now with Melissa at his school, he would end up feeling something, just an urge to protect her. As Izuku would end up being bullied, he would see her being bullied as well. However, he just wouldn't stand for that, as every time they would end up coming and trying to bully her, Izuku would stand up for them, as Izuku realized something. He was stronger than everyone there, even if they tried to use their quirks or ganged up on them. Nothing hurt Izuku. Only the things that got into his mind hurt him. Nothing physical they did to him would ever hurt him. At least that's what he thought at such a young age. As Izuku realized that all of the people that had been bullying him for over a year were weaker than him, he would start to stand up for himself more and more, protecting Melissa and protecting himself as well. As finally people learned just to back off from Izuku and not bat an eye towards him, rather than just to ignore him than anything else. However, one Katsuki Bakugo that thought that this ignoring Izuku was quite hard. Having been bullying him for a year, he couldn't fathom just leaving him alone, as he had gotten an addiction to burning Izuku's skin. However, it wasn't actually burning. Nothing was. He just thought it was because he was naive. As every time Bakugo would come close to Izuku would just glare right at him, sending shivers down the young Bakugo's body. He just couldn't fathom Izuku coming at him. He had gotten beaten by Izuku multiple times for trying to bully the quirkless Melissa. And so Bakugo eventually would end up learning just to scoff at Izuku and not even bat an eye towards him, much like all of the other kids. So all of the other kids would spread rumors around about Izuku being a villain or some other sort, or some type of deal he made to the devil to gain power. However, it was simply not the case. He was a Saiyan after all, and it made sense that Izuku was much stronger than them. And so when Izuku turned the age of 6, Inko had finally had enough of reports coming home that Izuku was beating up other kids for bullying others, as the school had heard about Izuku being quirkless. And so in an act to protect the quirked kids, they would end up lying, making up false accusations of Izuku, saying that he just went off, yelling at all of them or just beating many of them up for no reason at all, when the reason was he had to protect Melissa, his best friend. And so that's what would end up happening, Izuku doing all that, as Inko would finally teach Izuku the art of ki. However, Izuku had already been learning, as another thing that had landed along with the ship, or in a secret compartment in the ship, one of the grandparents of Izuku had placed a mysterious manual. It was weird. They had all of a sudden had a dream about this book, a massive book that said not to even open it, but there's going to be an occasion, so you must put it into your space pod. So they would do something like that, getting a space pod and putting this massive book that just appeared out of nowhere right next to their bed inside of it. And that book had been a book about all of the different types of techniques ki could be, as Izuku would end up being an avid reader, going around reading any book he can. With no friends to go outside and play with, Izuku was stuck inside most of the time, or just sitting under trees reading books. And so Izuku would end up stumbling across this book while examining the space pod that Inko had brought in and placed in the backyard of All Might's house. With Izuku examining it, the back compartment would end up falling out, as Izuku would see this massive book with his name written in gold letters on it, which was quite intriguing towards Izuku, causing him to open the book, where he would end up seeing all of these techniques, as it would just all appear in his mind, as Izuku could play out every single technique. As every day after school, when he was not playing with Melissa or when she had to go home, Izuku would go into the forest miles away from the house so that no one could hear him, as Izuku would end up practicing these techniques, mastering it, trying to become as powerful as he could, wanting just to protect his family more than anything else. However, Izuku would end up hearing that Inko was going to train him, so he would end up going along with it not to hurt his mother's feelings, thinking that it would be a great bonding experience, and if Izuku were to not have that, he would distance himself further and further from his mother. However, Inko would end up going insanely slow with the teaching she would end up giving Izuku, to the point that after a year, Izuku had already known all of the techniques and had mastered them fully by that point. It was just simple ki control about how to fire a ki blast off in a certain direction or how to curve a ki blast to trick out an opponent. So Izuku was sick of this, as he would tell his mother that he wanted some more challenging lessons. However, Inko couldn't fathom her son becoming such like a menace like the Saiyans were, as after living with humans for so long, she would end up just getting a thought in her mind that Saiyans were ravenous beasts or monsters that couldn't care less about anyone else. And so Inko didn't want her son to become like the average Saiyan. She didn't want Izuku to become heartless, someone who could just kill someone within an instant and not have any form of regret towards it. And so she would end up teaching Izuku, slowly teaching him all of these certain things. However, Izuku already knew all of this. He already knew this and what to do and what not to do. And so Izuku would end up growing to realize his mother was holding him back from his truest potential. So Izuku would end up just going along with this. However, he had a hunch that his mother was holding him back on purpose for some sick reason in his mind. When Izuku was 12, however, something strange would end up happening. When Izuku turned 10, All Might had revealed to him that he was his father, as Izuku would just ask why he hid it from him for so long, as All Might would just say, I didn't want you spreading anything in your school. I can't believe you didn't have any faith in me, All Might. But, I guess that's besides the point now, huh? You at least finally told me who you really were. I mean, at least you ended up telling me, that is. So, as 2 years would end up passing from All Might telling Izuku who he really was, Izuku would end up watching the news with his mother after one night. They had heard that his father was out doing hero work and might be on the news, and so Izuku would be watching it intriguingly, wanting to see his father on television. And so, with that, Izuku would end up seeing a major battle unfold, as All Might would be in a heated battle with a silver-haired man who would just be laughing at All Might extensively. You truly have gotten weaker, All Might. I can't believe you're this weak. Maybe that woman has softened you up and made you such a coward, All For One's striking voice would say, as All Might would yell, What do you mean? Don't mention her, All Might would yell back, as All For One would just laugh. Oh, it appears I struck a soft spot, huh? I guess maybe I should kill them, huh? As All Might would yell, Don't you even dare! Yelling off, charging at All For One in a blind rage, as All For One would end up just laughing. You truly are a fool, All Might, a man of emotions, one fully caught up in them, as All For One would raise his fist before slamming it down on top of All Might's golden hair, as All Might's head would jolt backwards as he would then fall. He's flat, now landing there with his hands clenched. He would try to get up, but All For One would plant his foot on the back of All Might. No, I can't die here. Not now. Please, I gotta continue living for them. For Inko. For Izuku, All Might would say, as All For One would bend down, his head now right next to All Might's ear. You're a fool, All Might. You let your love get in the way, and that's what just got you killed, as All For One would raise his hand up high in the air before slamming it down on the ground, as All Might's head would be chopped clean off. It would then roll down, bumping on all of the different types of debris before finally settling, as the blank eyes would stare directly into the camera, as Izuku would watch on in horror, as Inko would cover her mouth trying to hold back her tears, however she couldn't, bursting into massive tears would droop out of her eyes as she just couldn't take it anymore. Her entire family, her parents, she had had to leave her homeworld, and now, oh my, her husband, her lover, she couldn't handle this much stress. She would end up rushing up to her room as Izuku would end up watching on as he would see the death of what he thought was his father. As Izuku would end up shutting off the TV before walking up to his room, flipping open the book with his name written in golden letters on it. As he would end up flipping through, he would end up coming to the final page, a page he had never visited before, for somehow and some reason. He just felt the urge to wait, not wanting to go to this page. As he would turn the page, now looking at the final page, he would end up reading off his name. Izuku Midoriya, species, Saiyan. As he would end up reading even further and further and further, he would end up seeing all of these different types of things. His mother was Inko, and his father was who? He wasn't human. He was led to believe he was human all of this time, but he really wasn't. That explains all of the strength that Izuku had when he was a child. It explains it all. Izuku would start to realize everything. Everything his mother had told him was a lie. Just a fake. His entire life was a lie. As Izuku would realize all of this, he would end up sitting back in his chair, as Inko would end up seeing Izuku reading this and realizing this. As she, standing in her doorway, would look on, as tears would end up streaming down her eyes even more. No, I tried my hardest to keep that a secret from you. Everything's falling apart. Izuku would look on towards his mother, just in cold eyes, as hatred would start brewing in his soul. She had held him back this long and had lied about his entire life. His father, All Might, someone he called dad for years, wasn't really his dad? Was she even really his mother? Izuku wasn't having it, as he would look on coldly towards his mother before pointing towards the door, signifying that he wanted her out. As Inka would grab the handle of the door, shakily pulling it shut, she would end up slumping back onto the door as her head would hit the ground, as Inka would now be holding both sides of her head with both of her hands, clenching her hair. What has happened? What's happened to my life? I can't believe it. Everything's falling apart. Why? Why me? Inka would say in frustration. She just couldn't take it. As years would end up passing, Melissa and David Shield would end up comforting Inko and Izuku. However, Izuku wouldn't really need comforting. Why would he need comforting to someone that wasn't at all related to him? Sure, he might have been written down on some adoption papers or something, but that doesn't matter. He wasn't his true father, so who cares? Izuku would say, not really caring at all what had happened to All Might. However, Izuku did care about one thing, and that just happened to be Melissa Shield. And so with Melissa Shield now near UA, both of them would end up taking the UA entrance exams. However, Izuku would end up hearing all about how his mother would end up hating heroes because it was the same program that had killed her husband. And so she would end up telling time and time again that Izuku is forbidden to become a hero. However, Izuku wouldn't care. Izuku knew he was far stronger than Inka would ever become, and so Izuku couldn't care less of what she had thought. She had taught him through these, holding him back, as the household would end up just deteriorating over time, not being kept up by Inko, as he had just completely stopped cleaning it entirely after All Might had died. As different types of bugs would come through the walls, as holes even in the roof, spewing different birds, rats, and all sorts of different things throughout the house. as Izuku would just see the house slowly deteriorate over time as people would start to feel sorry for Izuku. Many of the people close to All Might. However, Izuku wouldn't care, just telling them to stop feeling sorry for him. He doesn't need their sorrow just bouncing back onto him. They just shouldn't. As Izuku, however, would end up being nice to the one person he truly cared about, and this, of course, being Melissa Shield. So, when Izuku would end up going on to take the entrance exam, he would bid her good luck as she would go on to take the support course exam, where she would end up easily passing the exam. With her enhanced skills and technology due to her father, she would easily pass through it. And so now we're left with Izuku, who, after hearing about the written exam, he would end up writing through it. With his extensive knowledge through books and reading, Izuku would pass it no sweat. However, things would start to change when it came to the Hero Course exam. After it was explained to Izuku and the rest of the kids in the Coliseum, or the auditorium, Izuku would be sent off to wherever it was going to be taking place, as Izuku was assigned a city where he would end up heading off towards it. As he would be standing inside of a hallway, Izuku would end up seeing the doors open. Seeing that as his ticket to start, Izuku would launch off, flying off, skyrocketing the people back as they would end up trying to hold themselves onto the ground. As the wind pressure made by Izuku's liftoff sent tons of wind rushing towards them. As Izuku would fly around with ki blasts in his hands, as he would end up just destroying them, sending hundreds of ki blasts flying everywhere, as they would end up curving around, just being sent flying at just hordes of robots, as they would end up exploding, sending robot chunks and parts, wires, and metal flying everywhere, embedding itself, destroying glass, embedding itself in buildings and walls, and stop signs and cars surrounding the city streets. As Izuku would go around, however, he would end up deciding to take a break. After destroying hundreds upon hundreds of robots, Izuku would think, I think I have enough points for now. I don't think anyone can get this high, Izuku would say, cracking his knuckles. As Izuku would end up hearing a cry for help, as stomping would end up being heard all around just the city, as Izuku would start to feel an earthquake, as the ground would start to violently shake, as some buildings would even topple over, including the one Izuku was sitting on. As Izuku would jump up, now floating above it, he would see the building collapsing, as Izuku would see someone right in the path of it. Izuku would swoop down, grabbing them by their arms, yanking them up before setting them back down. That was close. Should try to be more careful next time, Izuku would say, before hearing another cry for help. He would look on directly on where he had heard it, as he would see a massive zero-pointer towering over him. As he would end up hearing the cry for help again, he would look on towards the zero-pointer's feet, as there was a brunette girl stuck under rubble. Izuku would rush off towards it, his hands now down to his side, as he would start to yell the Kamehameha wave, just yelling Kamehameha, continuing on until he got right up to the front of the robot's head, as he would end up launching a massive wave, just yelling "Ah!", just sending a massive wave barreling right through the head of the zero-pointer, as a massive spiraling just blast, sending the zero-pointer tumbling backwards, malfunctioning as its entire head had basically just been disintegrated off by a massive ki blast. As Izuku would float back down, lifting up the rocks off of the girl, setting it down like it was nothing. Before picking her up, he would end up hearing that the entrance exam was over. As we now skip 2 weeks ahead, as Izuku would end up getting a letter in the mail saying that tomorrow was his first day at UA, and that he had gotten a UA record of 1,000 points in the entrance exam. Congratulations, Izuku Midoriya. We hope to see you here at UA soon. As Izuku would end up looking on at the box that the envelope had been sent in, there would be his school uniform, perfectly tailored to his size. So as Izuku would end up putting on the uniform, he would end up walking down the stairs after a day from receiving the message. Izuku, where are you going? No, I recognize that uniform. You can't. You can't go to UA. I can't lose you. I've lost everyone. You can't go, Izuku. As Izuku would look on towards his mother. Mom, this is my dream. You have to accept that I want to become a hero. You can't go, Izuku. You can't. Inko would now jump onto Izuku, holding him back, yelling, pushing him back, yelling that he can't go to UA. As Izuku would say, Mom, get off of me. However, she would just continue on muttering, you can't. As Izuku, now raising his voice in a cold, raspy one, would yell, Inko, get off of me. As Inko would jump back in retaliation violently after hearing her name being called by her own son. He didn't call her Mom, but rather by her first name. As her hands would now be shaking, reaching out towards Izuku, Izuku would stop looking on back towards her. You gotta stop holding me back, Mom. I've had enough of it. Goodbye, Inko, Izuku would say before walking out, shutting the door, going on to his first day at UA. And that is where I'm gonna leave this What If off, everyone. Part 2 is coming out tomorrow. And yeah, I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.